We have a really awesome show today. It's about learning how to make decisions and using your intuition and not second guess yourself. Intuition is one of the key elements that help us make a good decision. So, we're actually going to be talking about why we make the decisions we do and sometimes why we don't listen to our intuition. And today, we have a guest by the name of Sunil Godse. Sunil really learned this valuable lesson through three major life circumstances. One, when he found himself working in a job he did not love, when he took on a client that financially ruined him, and then when he lost a close friend in his life. And after these three instances, he decided to study how to make better decisions. So, Sunil, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. Thanks for having me, and happy to educate your listeners on the importance of this intangible, subconscious thing called intuition that leads to amazing, intangible results when you trust it, and some of the devastating things that happen when you ignore it.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right in with your story.
Hmm.
Start off with, you found yourself in a job that you didn't love.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this was, yeah. I mean, so if for those watching, I'm a South Asian male, and so there's a specific, there's four doors that you can kind of go into when it comes to a career. As a South Asian male, it's going to be doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. It's one of those four. And so I ended up picking up door number three, which was engineering. My dad was an engineer, and so I drank sort of the societal or cultural Kool-Aid. Even though my intuition was saying that everything I did, all these breadcrumbs of things I've done in the past led to entrepreneurship. And even at 5 years old, I remember there was these set of video games that I wanted to buy. I wanted my dad to buy, and my dad said it was too expensive. And I distinctly remember this voice coming and saying, "Sunil, you need to go door to door to raise money." And that's exactly what I did. I raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity, because it just felt really right for me and felt good. And so all these things, to selling suits at Tip Top and doing stuff in marketing and bake sales and stuff like that. Just it really pointed to this entrepreneurial drive in me. And so 2 years in that 3 year stint, like I really didn't enjoy the career. I got an opportunity to become a private investor with a restaurant chain that we brought up from Mexico, and I was making soon 5 times more in dividends as a part-time investor than I was in engineering. And so it was just very clear that, engineering wasn't for me. I quit in year three. I sacrificed my relationship with my dad, which was necessary to do. And I ended up becoming an engineer, then became a management consultant after four or five ventures, $20 million in revenues, and then started helping other companies really kind of succeed. I got a contract where the contract terms were changing, and I really, in my intuition, was saying back off, and I didn't. I was so emotionally tied to this great contract with a lot of money down in Silicon Valley, and I spent every single penny going down there, and the company didn't pay me. And so I came back up to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account. And the last one, and you kind of mentioned, I had a friend reach out to me. She was being stalked at the time, and I was doing some coaching and engineering. And so she said, "Sunil, I really need to get your advice, and I really need to talk to you." And my intuition was at that time, it was kind of the something that was telling me meet with her that afternoon. And I just said, let's meet a couple of days later. But I wasn't busy. And then very next day, that same fellow actually followed her to a bus shelter and shot and killed her, pulled a bullet through her head. And I could have prevented that, had I given her the right advice. And so it was really important for me to dig deep to figure out, okay, what were these some things? What was this thing called intuition? And the premise of intuition really kind of came from like formalizing it is when after I wrote my first book, Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise of that book is if you learn from the failures of others in business, then as long as you don't repeat those lessons, then you should be able to succeed. And one of the things that I kept getting asked when I was speaking on stages around the world about that book was, Sunil, tell me the one thing as an entrepreneur that I can do to make me succeed. And so I was kind of rolled my eyes, said, well, that's why I talked to close to 300 people and 75 stories in the book. Yet when I went back to the audio recordings, many of them use some form, 80 to 90% of them, of intuition. I ignored my intuition. I should have trusted my gut. I knew what the right decision was. And that really crystallized and formalized this formal thing called intuition. And then when I reflected on all the experiences I just told you, it just solidified, yeah, when I trust intuition, good things happen. When I ignore my intuition, I mean, there's so much time wasted.
Mm.
So I really need to find out, okay, how do I conceptualize intuition? And I saw it as an art and a science. Coming from the engineering background, and if I'm going to write a book about it, I got to find some science behind this, because at the time it was very spiritual in nature, manifestation, coming from the cosmos. And that's fine. If people think that that's where intuition comes from, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I have my own definition. And so I took a look at the research, and lo and behold, there's tens of thousands of articles, MRIs, there's brain scans. There was research that's showing that infants as young as 2 months old had intuitive capabilities. Intuition at that time, the research was showing 7 to 10 seconds. It happens 7 to 10 seconds even before you actually make a decision or take an action. Research that I'm told by a colleague coming out now, because the research methodology has gotten better, it's as early as 23 seconds before you actually take a decision or make an action. So the science was clear that it existed. The art part is these signals that I keep talking about. And so what I found out is that, okay, that resonates with me. So let's go talk to a whole bunch of other people to see, okay, what do they think about intuition? And I interviewed over 1,000 people. And I found that it came down to kind of 3 different groups. The first group are the ones that absolutely get it. And they operate on intuition. They know what their signals are. There was an international psychic that I interviewed, and I've also interviewed a Buddhist monk. They completely live their lives on intuition. The second group of people are the ones that kind of talk about intuition, things like mindset and things like that, but they don't actually walk the talk, because trusting your intuition is really about being in the moment. It's really about listening to those signals and taking those decisions. And so one of my colleagues I met, his name's Hal Eisenberg, and he was sort of in the mindset space. I was in the intuition space. So there's a really good crossover. And so he actually saw me talk about intuition, and I started talking about the 4 types of intuition and intuitive signals that are both positive and negative. And it really crystallized for him how intuition behaved. He never really understood how it behaved until he heard me talk. And it became really, really important for him, because he started getting some signals when his health started going down south, saying you should get to a hospital. And these signals kept getting louder and louder. And he ignored it. He says, it's just a cold, just a fever. He actually got COVID-19, and he ended up in a New York hospital. And he came to a life or death moment. He actually wanted to die. That was how bad it got. And he said, intuition and how you talked about it, at the moment that it actually pulled me from wanting to die to live, I fully realized what intuition was, how it operated in the present moment, and how I thought. He said, after I came out of that, when I make a decision based on intuition, it's clear, the dots are connecting, I know where to go. And whereas before, I wasn't even doing that. It was just kind of, I talked about it, but I kind of strayed from it. So that was the sort of the second group of people. The third group of people are the ones that don't believe in it at all. And so if you remember me telling you about, sort of that coming from the spiritual side and all that stuff, one of my very, very first interviewees with the Intuitionology Project was a gentleman by the name of John Rothschild. Now, John Rothschild was an investment banker. Data, decisions, and experience all mattered to him. So when you're faced with the intuition that comes from a spiritual perspective, he's like, you know what, Sunil, we can get together. I don't know what we're going to talk about, because I really don't get this thing called intuition. I don't believe in it. I will talk for 5 minutes, and we'll catch up for the rest of 55 minutes, because I'm giving you an hour, and I haven't seen you in a while. So I sat down and I turned on the cameras, and we start talking about intuition. And it's very clear. He's saying in the interview, yeah, I don't get these omens, and I wish I'll shake the hand of that person that is able to do that. And when you make business decisions, it's not based on that. Like, it's based on data and experience. But what I did tell him is that, well, John, one of the 4 types of intuition is called experiential intuition. And so when you're born, you've got all these neurons firing that are taking all these experiences that are relevant to you and parking it in the subconscious area of the brain like a library. So whenever you make a decision, it's going to pull from that library all the stuff that you've been through in the past, both good and bad, both formal and informal, to help you make the decision in a split second. And so now he's kind of getting it. And then I said, well, and in some cases, it actually gets you to make a decision that goes wildly against the data. And so now he's saying, oh, well, I have an example like that. And so he was opening franchise locations. When you open up a franchise location on a benchmark system, a 9 out of 10 or higher, 10 out of 10 would get you a franchise location. Anything below, they wouldn't even touch it because it would be a money loser. Him and his partner walked into this location in Toronto, and there's the second part of the four is called situational intuition, where you sense that something is either off in a situation or something should happen. And situational intuition hit him at that moment, saying there's something about this location, even though it's showing up as a 5.5 out of 10. I sense that we should put it there. And his whole team was saying, are you nuts? Like, this is not even close to a 9 out of 10. And he said, no, we just think that we should put one there. And they did. And that ended up being the Beer Market, which was the biggest restaurant chain, the most profitable under his whole portfolio. Now, John is starting to use the language of intuition. And he's kind of saying, I think it's intuition. And then we start talking a little bit later. And then he starts getting this decision that he wants to make, which is really, it's called creative intuition. That's the third type. And creative intuition gets you to make a decision, in some cases is so obtuse that people think that you're crazy. And so he said, well, Sunil, I have an example like that as well. And so this is a guy who was making $3-4 million a year as an investment banker, high-end restaurants, limousines, and private jets. And he wanted to quit all that to run a tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And so his creative intuition, and now he's fully saying, my intuition was telling me to do that. Everybody thought he was crazy. And the only person he trusted was his wife. And he went to his wife. And this is now the fourth of the four, called relational intuition. Relational intuition gets you to listen to those who are really there and know what you want, and that's going to move you forward in support. And everybody else was looking to safety, to money, but it wasn't right for him. They didn't know what he wanted. And so he went to his wife and he said, this just feels right. And now we talk about these intuitive signals that are coming in. And now John is fully talking about intuition. He's using intuition, his body language, the way he's excited talking about this. He now gets it. Mm-hmm. And that decision that he made, all based on intuition, he quit his $3-4 million a year job, walked into that restaurant. That tiny bankrupt little restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number 1. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations. Over 20 years, he grew that into a $2 billion behemoth before he retired, all because of an intuitive decision. And that's the power of intuition. And so that's how it works.
Do us a favor. You hit 4 areas of intuition. Would you list those in order again?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's experiential intuition, and that again looks at the background, the experience, learning, formal, informal that you've had right from birth. Then we have situational intuition, and that's when you get into a room or a situation, you know that something's off or you just need to do something, and in most cases it's a warning sign. The third is relational intuition, and this is where you're looking at the person in the picture, if there is, and is that person trustworthy? Are the actions matching the words? Are the body twitches deceptive in nature? And it's really establishing that trust. And research shows that you establish trust within 14 seconds. And so within that 14 seconds, you'll know whether that person is being truthful or not, or the intention is the right intention. And it's always on. So, you know, in relationships, for example, people will have the greatest intentions at the start, but something changes in their values or your values. And then at some point, your intuition has already given second chances and saying, okay, now this person's crossing your values to now you need to get out of the relationship. And the last one is the creative intuition. And that's the one which is the actual decision that you make. If it's a mundane decision, sort of routine, what am I going to have for supper? Then your creative intuition is quite low. But if it's higher up where you need to know, like John, he made a completely nutso decision. It was right for him, but for everybody else, they couldn't understand because they're looking at the safe route. And that's when creative intuition is sort of at its height. And they all work together in a split second to give you a decision. And they speak to you through things called intuitive signals. And these are the
So
signals that are really important for you to know.
before we go to intuitive signals, I think there was one more that you mentioned, spiritual intuition.
Well, no, spiritual is one that I mean, people think that it comes from that. So it all
Gotcha.
depends upon where they think that they're getting the signals from. So some people get signals from their body. Some people think that they get signals from God, and it's or spiritual. And I had a former NHL coach say it came from the cosmos, and that's fine because intuition, it's your intuition. You're born with it. It's your signals. It's your experiences. How you define it is really up to you. And from a scientific perspective, intuition hits the amygdala, which is the fight or flight area. There's no language around it. There's no words. So, and it's a feeling, right? And so the difference between, say, fear, that a saber-toothed tiger is going to eat you is one thing, but if there's fear because you're afraid of failing or going in a new direction, and fear is one of the four intuitive hurdles, that's different because even though it's new or fear of change, there's a positive intuitive signal that's saying, yeah, but you can go here. There's some past experience that you've had that is telling me that you've done it before. You can make that difficult decision. If you think it's difficult, it's not really. You just take the step because I'm signaling to you that it's the right thing to do. And so when we have these things about, gut feeling and voice and all that, those things, we're really actually putting language around what we think it is. And the other thing that you want to do with intuitive signals is that if you look back, and all of your listeners can do that, or those watching can do this today, they can go back to the decisions that they made that were the right ones and the wrong ones. And what did it feel like in the moment? And that's when they get that inventory of positive signals and negative signals. And what
Yeah.
happens is they have to continue to work at that because let's say your signal, you and I share a signal like that voice that I had when I was 5 years old. So for you, that could be the first signal. And if it is the first signal, fantastic. So that that's
The inner
the first
voice.
signal that comes in. It's an inner voice, yeah. But let's say that signal for me was signal number 3. What that's telling me is for the decision I made, I actually missed 2 signals. And when I missed 2 signals, what that means is I made 2 bad decisions. So those 2 bad decisions could be simply like a stub toe, or it could mean that I'm heading to bankruptcy. I don't know the veracity of what the decision is, because I've missed those signals. And so
So
it starts getting you on a slippery slope.
So, how do we figure out what our own signals are for intuition and decision making? And then what
And
order
so
they come in?
and this is where you need to really so take a problem that you do. And I have people go through a 7-day challenge. And so if you go to my website, you get the free ebook. There's a free 7-day challenge that actually takes you through this step. And so in 7 days, what you do is you have a problem that you've wrestled with. And the first thing you do is look at what happened in the past that didn't work. And so when they didn't work, what did it feel like in the moment? And you keep ruminating on that, because what you'll start doing is the reason why it didn't work is because you ignored your intuition, and there were a bunch of negative signals telling you that something didn't work. So what did it feel like? What was your body telling you, or what was God telling you, or however you couch these signals in based on how you think it works. Then once you've got those negative signals, you put yourself in what I call an intuitive medium, which is where you go to think about, you cut out the noise and you think clearly about what steps you need to take. So some people, jog. Some people in the shower, I get some great thoughts when I'm driving long distances. So these are things that you do to really kind of cut out the noise, take a walk, even at nighttime, get up in the middle of the night. And so this is where you can think clearly and say, okay, what should I do? And if I'm thinking about what I should do, then what do I feel in that? Typically a positive signal is like the dots connecting, it feels right, it's a flow. Those are typical. Negative signals have been sort of the anxious gut feeling and even the left earlobe getting hot. I've heard that from one of the entrepreneurs. So this is where you'll take a look. And if you're making a decision that's not right, even though you think it's the path, guess what? You've already done your homework on negative signals. So you're going to know that a negative signal is going to come up, says, okay, so that's not a path I should take to solve this problem, because I've already done my homework on the negative signals. So now you've got a path to what you should do. Now there's a couple of things you have to change. One is going to be changing the people around you. So who's going to give you advice to solve that problem? Who do you have to surround yourself to solve that problem? And it could be, it may be your best friend, or it could be a mentor. So for this specific problem, who are you going to surround yourself with, or who's going to give you advice? What environment do you have to change in? If you have to, do you have to move? Do you have to get a piece of technology? So what environment do you have to be in to solve that problem, if anything? And then you take action. And again, those are all guided by your intuitive signals, both positive and negative. And so a lot of it is just stuff that you've already had in the past. You just have to really dig deep to figure out what those inventory of signals are.
I'm taking everything that you're saying and kind of looking at a scenario in my life where have you ever been in a state of you're not fully awake, but you're not fully asleep?
I almost 3 times a night that happens.
And
3 times a week, sorry, 3 times a week, pardon me.
So in this moment, I felt like I heard God's voice speak to me something.
Okay.
And it was something that he wanted me to do at a specific time, at a specific location, doing a specific thing. I don't feel too comfortable yet sharing with the audience because it might happen. I don't know, but it's a fair, if it were to happen, it'd be a big deal, at least to me. And then what had occurred, like I didn't know what to do with that. So I called people and I shared with them, and then some of them like, hey, you know what? This might be God. Call this person. So I called another person, and he's like, well, I don't know, but then, like 2 weeks later, he texted me and said, hey, show up to this event and be there. And it was like 2 hours before the event. I didn't know what to expect. I show up, and one of the first people I meet was 100% the person that could help make this dream come to pass. Amazing. And it's on board with their mission and their vision. And I didn't know about them. They are from Florida. They came up here. And so then I've had other conversations with them. Well, now they want to host the exact same thing that I want to at the exact same date that I want to. Meanwhile, they forgot that I said, hey, I want to host this exact same thing at this exact same time. And they forgot about the specifics of the dream. They know who I am. They knew that I have a heart and a vision for that type of ministry. Yep. But then when I had to go remind, like, no, you said you want to do this at this time. Here, read this again. And like, oh. And the whole crux of it, it revolves around ministry. And what they want to do is basically give it's a traveling ministry package that they want to give to someone to go do full-time ministry. And I want to be the person that receives that. And so everything aligns to like, hey, I'm everything is saying I'm that guy. I don't know if it'll happen or not. There's other things that also come into effect, like getting a location to hold this event. And it'll be an outdoor event. And so it's just, so with the vague story that I shared with you, how could you help me go through the intuition process of trying to, because I'm new to, like, because before, everything to me on intuition was spiritual.
Right.
Even right down to, hey, take your extra pair of keys with you. Well, why would I take my extra pair of keys? Oh, well, I ended up locking one of them in the car. I mean, just stuff like that.
Yeah. So this is, for all the listeners listening or all those watching, you've just demonstrated yourself a case study of how intuition works. And every single person listening can have a similar story to what you just recounted. That's exactly how intuition works. The tactics of getting the location and the logistics of it, that will come when you sit and think about, okay, what are the action steps that I need to do to make this vision happen? And so we're now also getting into the manifestation space that people talk about, and how far people want to take the power of intuition. Like if you were to recount that story to my friend John Rothschild, who cares about data and understands intuition as just data and background and experience, and he defines it from that context, And he now understands there's feelings that help him to make really obtuse decisions and go against the data. And he listens to your story. He may not resonate with your story, but when I define it in his context, how he understands it, he absolutely gets intuition. When you look at the experience that you just gave me, that is 100% intuition that comes from and when you're open to it, and the main thing is acting on it, and you acted on it. A lot of people will get these things and they'll dismiss it, or they won't be in tune with it, right? Because they don't understand these signals or there's messages, and you've got a really good focus on that and you've acted on it. Things start happening. The doors of opportunity start opening up. The dots start connecting, and when the dots start connecting, you start connecting more dots, like the marketing, like the location, like how you're going to do it. And this is where you sit and think, is it going to work? The relationships that form. That's intuition hard at work. So you've just demonstrated exactly how it's operated. And again, if you think it's spiritual, fantastic. I mean, it's not for me to agree with how you experience it, because that's none of my business. It's how you interpret it, and it could be spiritual in some senses. It could be non-spiritual in others. It all depends upon how you've experienced intuition before, and that's key. It's very individual. But yeah, I mean, that's a perfect case study on how it works. And really, I mean, the guts and nuggets of the story doesn't really matter. It's just that now you can see, wow, how did these things align? And how many people are just going to scratch their heads and say, yeah, this has happened in my life before. But yeah,
Well,
you're a perfect case study.
it's interesting because, when I look at my experiences, I'm very hesitant and I'm almost fearful of the current possibility, because I've so desired to do ministry that a lot of it has failed miserably and been hurt painfully. So it's like I'm really feeling like there's something here, probably more so than I've ever felt before, but yet I'm way more cautious than I've probably also ever been. But yet I'm also operating in faith, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so and so what I would tell you is that if you're intuitively led to do ministry, it sounds like this is just getting stronger and stronger. In the times that there's been cautious, why was it cautious? Why did it hurt? Who did you listen to? What direction did you take it? And what did it feel at the time? Did it feel like, yeah, that kind of makes sense? Or maybe there's people are working on a sense of logic, but you can't necessarily work on a sense of logic because they say, that's how it done, or it's traditionally done that way. You've got a way of doing it differently. I mean, if you look at the dots connecting with his voice, you're not asking anybody. So this is really looking back and saying, okay, how did I do it before? Why didn't it work? And really think about the decisions that you made and then the feelings that were there as to why it didn't work. Was it not the right time for me? Was it not the right person that I was talking to? Maybe I wasn't listening and I felt going into a traditional path that everybody else does, but that's not the one I needed to do. And when I did, look what happened. And so this is where you really clear the board, and you don't really worry about what other people have to say or think, because if the dots are connecting so strongly, that's where it goes. And who cares about what other people think? Because this is your vision. You can tell the passion in what you want to do. Absolutely. And this is a passion now with a purpose. There's a huge difference between being passionate and then having a purpose on it. And the purpose is much grander than what people think. That when you match those two, then you can move forward. Then you really, in the present moment, you take one step and the next step and the next step. You don't worry about what other people think. Just like I was telling you about Hal Eisenberg, he wasn't walking the talk. And a very good case study of this is, there was a friend of mine who has cerebral palsy, and he went on vacation. His dream was to dip his toe. He's always been in a wheelchair, but just feel the ocean and the sand in his toes. So his friends take him up to the beach. He dips his toes in the water, and he falls flat into the water. And he says, I have two choices to make, Sunil. The first choice is to just get up, face, that embarrassment, the fear, and looking around. I could got back up in my wheelchair and sat back in, and forever regretted that I was never able to soak the sands in between my toes or feel the ocean. Or I can get up and take the next step, and I can take the next step, and I can take the next step. And that's what he did. And he continued to go in the water and he's pointing to the water, dig up to his chin. And then he looked back and he said, I hadn't realized how far I had come. Too many of us are trying to look at where we should be going. What's the goal? I want to have that big house. I want to do this. I want to be famous. All these extrinsic motivations. That's okay if that's a symbol of your success. If your intention is that that's what it truly means, that's a different story. But we, especially with social media, we hang our hat on external stuff where we should just simply be taking one step, add another step, and another step. And then you look back. And then you realize your goals, your dreams, your aspirations driven by intuition, and you'll start knowing how farther you've become. And then you become an inspiration for others around you. And I mean, what a way to live a life.
Right. As you can tell, I mean, I am a Christian. I believe in Jesus. And there's this concept with New Ageism that you can speak things into existence in the cosmos, and the cosmos will make it happen. While I don't necessarily adhere to that ideology, there are key scriptures in the Bible. It says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. As a man thinketh, so is he." And there's evidence within scripture that it is very important to be careful of what you speak. So, for example, for life and death are in the power of the tongue, therefore choose life. There's scriptures that far preceded spiritualism or New Ageism that talks about guarding what you say and what you think. Renew your mind daily. I butchered that scripture, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you won't be led astray, basically. And so with these scriptures, it really talks about what we think, what we speak is vitally important. So how do we take intuition and the way we think and speak and combine them to work in harmony?
So it really comes down to intention. So speaking for the sake of speaking is just noise. When you are speaking with intention, and that's what you really mean. And so people who do meditation or go to church or, people who even recite scriptures, the intention is not necessarily there. I mean, I'm a Hindu, right? And I see so many people, praying and doing stuff, but I know kind of how they behave even after saying something, yeah, right? And so the intention has to be really pure. And so when you speak and you speak with intention, that means that you're going to act that way. You're going to behave like that. You're going to treat people that way. You're going to take those steps. And that's where you really have to get in the present moment. So when people are meditating or becoming spiritual, they really have to believe that that's what's going to happen. And otherwise, it's just noise. And the intuition is also a two-way street. So as much as you think you can put out some stuff and talk the talk, other people's intuition is looking at you and your intention and saying, yeah, the words don't match. I don't believe him. Great. And so that's what their intuition is picking up on, that intention. And so that's where you have to be really careful. So yes, absolutely. I believe what your scriptures are saying. It's just that the intention has to be very, very pure. And then that's when you start taking the steps, because the intentionality is there. And then the outcomes start coming, right? So when you take care of the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves. It's something I talk about all the time.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on today's show. I like to end each show with the same three questions. So right now, in the terms of self-talk, what is the biggest lie that you've been telling yourself?
The biggest lie is that I'm going to change the world. And when I used to do that or think about that, it was very externally focused. The way that I self-talk now is, yes, I can change the world, but I'm going to do it one person at a time. And I'll let the ripple effect and the butterfly effect change the world for me as I keep moving on with my message about trusting intuition.
What is the best decision you've ever made?
The best decision I've ever made is to educate my two girls on intuition early on. No, kids, I never had it, and they've had it. Both of them have been able to move away from bullying incidences even before the behaviors overtook them. They saw the behaviors early. If you look at the art behind me, my 14-year-old daughter, and at 12, opened up an official federal nonprofit agency to paint so that she can help raise money for disabilities and illnesses and get them to express themselves through art, all on intuition.
That's awesome. Last question. What brings you peace?
Trusting my intuition. It's very simple. Listening to those signals, knowing what my path is very peaceful because there's no negativity. There's no irrationality. There's no negative signal that's bothering me. It feels like the dots are connecting. It feels peaceful. It feels like the doors just keep opening and opening.
Thank you so much for coming on today's show, Sunil. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to connect more or hear more about you, your books, your material, your website?
Absolutely. So yeah, they go to intuitionology.com. I've got a free ebook that takes them to the 7-day challenge. Both are free, and they can solve a problem by themselves using their own intuition, their intuitive capabilities. On all the channels on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'll soon to be on TikTok without dancing. I'm not going to do any dancing. And I've got the Intuitionology podcast series, and they're on. You can also see that at intuitionology.com/podcast, or any of the apps, iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, Google Podcasts. Lots of ways to connect with me. DM me, send me an email at sunil@sunilgodse.com. Happy to answer any questions.
And that, just so for people's reference, your last name, or that's Sunilgodse.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. Alrighty, sir. Well, thank you so much and have an amazing day.
Thank you very much.